Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Simply Great, where I talk about all things faith and lifestyle. And in today's video, we are in part 5 of the Bible study series. I didn't know there's going to be this many parts, to be honest, but I'm really excited to get into the video and just share a little bit about what God has been speaking to me. And if you have not watched the other 4 parts, I encourage you to go watch that because it will make a lot more sense. Okay, so in today's video, we are going to be in Matthew chapter 25, verses 20 through 21. And we're essentially going to be talking about those seasons in life where we kind of are like, God, what is the purpose of this? Why am I here? Like, I want to be here, but you have me here. It's like, why am I here? And we're going to be talking about those seasons in life where we kind of just don't see the purpose, or where we don't, those certain seasons where we don't desire to be in, right? Like, you can be in your single season and you don't desire to be here. You desire to be married. You desire to be there, but God has you here and it's for a reason. And we're going to be just diving a little bit deeper into those reasons, and also the importance of remaining faithful to God in whatever season He has called you to be in, because our faithfulness is really kind of like the key. Our faithfulness is essentially the key to going into the next thing that God is calling us to, right? Our faithfulness to God, it matters. It's of high importance. No matter what season we are in, it's important to remember that you must stay faithful to God. Okay, so let's just jump straight into this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Okay, so now I'm going to read Matthew chapter 25, verses 20 through 21, and I'm going to be in the AMP version. It says, "And the one who had received the 5 talents came and brought him 5 more, saying, Master, you entrusted to me 5 talents. See, I have made a profit and gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful and trustworthy over a little. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in the joy of your master." Okay, so something that I highlighted within these verses, specifically in verse 21, was where it says over a little. And then I also highlighted where it says many things. And something that I found interesting was that the master said to the servant, he also said this to the servant who had the 2 talents, who was also faithful as well. He said, "You have been faithful and trustworthy over a little." And I was really just kind of like asking God, like, okay, what does that little mean? Like, what are you specifically referring to? Because when it came to what the master entrusted his servants with, that the talents, like the huge sum of money, I'm like, God, I mean, I don't think anybody I don't think that's like little. Like, anybody would say like, oh, 1 talent is little. Like, that's a lot of money. Like, that's a lot. Like, it's of such high value that the disobedient servant had to bury that money. He didn't just leave the money lying around in his house. No, he was actually afraid to lose it. So he buried it, because that is a large sum of money. It's what it would take somebody, like, it's what you would make working for 20 years. 20 years. That's the equivalent. That's what he entrusted to one of his servants. Then he gave the other servant 5 talents, the other one 2 talents, like large sum of money. 5 talents, what you would make in 100 years. Some people don't even live up to 100. 2 talents, what you would make in 40 years. And it's like he entrusted that with his servants. And I'm like, God, to me, like, it doesn't seem little. Of course, to God, like, you know, it's of course to God, it's little because He's God, right? And the giver of the gift is always going to be of high value, of more importance than the gift itself. So of course, God looking at 1 talent, 5 talents, He's like, that's little. And of course, in comparison to God, that is very little. But I still don't believe that when God said, like, you have been faithful and trustworthy over little, like that He was referring to the gift. I feel like He was referring to the assignment itself, the assignment that was attached to the thing that He entrusted them with, which was, the assignment was to take these talents that I've entrusted you with, that I've entrusted to you, go invest in different places and bring forth a profit, so that upon my return, you can present me with the profit. Amen. And that was the assignment. And I feel like God was specifically stating that this assignment, that assignment that He gave them, was little. Now, is God saying that, okay, it doesn't matter, like it's not that important, or it's not a lot of work. No, that's not what God is saying. Like, any assignment that God gives you is going to require work, it's going to require energy, and it's of high importance, because whatever God tells you to do is should be your number one priority. It's of high importance. But what God is stating is that in comparison to the next assignment that He is about to give them, to the next thing that He's going to entrust them, that He's going to entrust to them, it's little, right? He said, "You've been faithful and trustworthy over little, and I will make you ruler over many things." The many things is the next step. Being faithful over the little was the first step. So you think about that, where it's like, this assignment was little in comparison to the next thing, and yet the disobedient servant, he failed. This was little. This was little in comparison to the next thing, in comparison to the next step. So it's essentially like something that I thought about was that if we can't even be faithful over the little that God has called us to do, how can we be faithful over the many that He will call us to do? So an example that I feel like would describe this, that something that God brought to my mind, was King David, right? In 1 Samuel 16, verses 13, we see David being anointed as king of Israel, right? David was the youngest of his brothers, and he was anointed as king of Israel. After Saul, he disobeyed God too many times, and God said, "I have rejected Saul," and essentially that He was going to choose another. That person was David. And it says in verse 14, pretty much after David was anointed as king of Israel, the Spirit of the Lord entered him that day, and the Spirit of the Lord left King Saul that day, and instead an evil spirit came and tormented King Saul. And once the evil spirit came, like, they were looking for somebody, like a good musician, to come and play music to help calm him down and stuff like that. So they thought of the son of Jesse, which is David. So David ended up becoming the armor bearer and also the harp player for King Saul. He would play the music, play the harp, and he would calm down and the spirit would leave him, right? And it says also in 1 Samuel 17, I'm just trying to give like some context for the life that David lived before he became king, like before he was actually the ruler. Although he was anointed, he wasn't king just yet. So in 1 Samuel 14, it says that David, 1 Samuel 17, verse 15, it says that David went back and forth from Saul to tend to his father's flock at Bethlehem. So even though he was Saul's armor bearer, and he would have to play the harp anytime the evil spirit came, right, to torment him, he was still going back to his father to tend to his father's sheep, to tend to his father's flock, right? So he was still shepherd, and yet he was also a servant to King Saul. And I found it interesting how he was, like, during this whole time, like, he was anointed as king of Israel, right? And yet God still allowed him to go through all of this. God didn't allow him to be king immediately. He allowed him to go through this season of just like, I don't even know what you call it, like maybe like a season of pruning, a season of just something that would not only test his faith, but strengthen it. And this is one of the reasons why I believe that King David, like, despite everything, like, once he became king and things like that, despite all his mistakes, despite all his sins with, Bathsheba, Uriah, and all the other stuff, how he was still labeled as a man after God's own heart. And I believe it had to do with how faithful he was in the season that God had him to prior, before he was king, right? This season of being a shepherd, this season of being a servant to King Saul, despite, like, King Saul wanted to kill David. Like, he was literally going around like trying to hunt him down. Like, he was trying to kill David. And even when David had the chance to kill King Saul, he did not take that chance. He remained faithful to Christ. And he's like, he knew that, do not touch my anointed. Like, he knew that command, and he was not willing to break it. He remained faithful to God, and that faithfulness, I believe, is what carried him into his next season, right? So he was essentially faithful over the little. He was faithful in that season. And, we just stated, like, the little is essentially, I would say, like, those seasons where it's kind of like sometimes it's less responsibility in comparison to the next step, because David was shepherd, David was an armor bearer, at first to King Saul, and then he ended up being appointed after he killed Goliath as essentially kind of like the leader of the men of war, leader of the army, and he would go wherever Saul would send him to go. So he still remained like a servant to Saul. And all of that in comparison to the next step that God was calling him to, which was to be king, was little. Because now as king, he was going to have to be ruler over all of Israel, make wiser decisions, trust in God more. It's a lot more responsibility to be king than it is to be a servant of the king. So I believe when God allowed him to go through that season, that step one of being, of the season of little, let's just call it that, the season of little, that God was strengthening his faith. God was testing him in ways he could not imagine. And from that, it produced a faithfulness, right? He was faithful in that season, and that allowed him to be faithful as king over Israel. Despite all his mistakes, despite everything that he committed, he is still a man after God's own heart because of how faithful he was to God in the season prior. So just to like bring this message in, like just full circle, right? Just bringing it together. I feel like there are certain seasons in our life that we just want to gloss over. Those seasons of little, right? We don't want to go through what David went through. We don't want to go through those seasons that like where it will test our faith, not only test our faith, but strengthen our faith. We don't want to do that. We don't want to go through those seasons that will help us to just remain faithful to Christ and just increase our trust in him. We don't want to go through that. We want to hop into the next season. We want to be ruler over the many things without learning how to be faithful over the little. And just another example of that would be sometimes we idolize marriage a bit too much. We idolize marriage and we want to be in marriage and we want to gloss over our single season, not recognizing the importance of a single season. There are things that God wants to teach us in our single season that will help us in the next season when we get married and all of that stuff. There is a faith that needs to be strengthened in our single season so that when we get married and life gets crazy, that faith will remain. There is a trustworthiness to God that needs to be built in our single season so that when we get into our marriage season, that we can not only trust God, but trust your partner. There are things that need to be built in the season of little that will help you to just truly still remain faithful to God when he makes you ruler over many. Okay. So there's these seasons in our life where a lot of times we just hate. We don't see the purpose of it. What's the purpose of this? Why can't I just be here? Why can't I just do that? And God is like, because God is not wicked. Because God is not wicked, like that disobedient servant said, he's not wicked. And God gives according to what we can do, according to what we have the ability to do. He is not going to allow you to get to step 2 until he has seen that you have been faithful in step 1. God is not going to allow you to get married until he sees that you have been faithful to him in your single season. Because if you're not faithful to God in your single season, you will not be faithful to God in your marriage. And if you're not faithful to God in your marriage, then that means your marriage is not centered around Christ. And if your marriage is not centered around Christ, then that means that marriage is going to crumble. Okay, so you see how the faithfulness, remaining faithful to God during any season that he has you in is key to essentially success. It's essentially moving forward. We have to remain faithful to God in whatever season he has us in. No matter if we don't see the point, no matter if we don't see like how it's going to help us in the future. God knows what he's doing. It's in those seasons of little where it truly, truly, truly just strengthens our faith, strengthens our relationship with God, so that in the next season, we can remain faithful. In the next season, even if we make a mistake, we will not forsake God. We will still be chasing down after God, being a woman of God or a man of God after God's own heart like David. We will still be chasing after God because our faith was strengthened in the season prior. So just focus on the season that God has called you to be in now, right? Like David. although he was anointed as king of Israel, he was called to be shepherd, and he was called to be a servant to King Saul. Focus, if God has called you to a specific thing now, focus on that thing now. Maybe God is calling you to do big things, and you have heard the promises of God, but maybe that's not what you're called to do right now. Maybe that's something that God is going to bring into fulfillment later, but right now he's calling you to do something different. So focus on that thing that God is calling you to do. Focus on that season of little, because the next thing that God calls you to do will be more responsibility. And God is not going to give you and trust you with the next thing until he sees that you have been faithful over the little thing that he has just called you to do. God is not going to give us something that we cannot do. So if he's calling you into this season, this is something that he knows you can do. This is something that he knows will benefit you. Any season that God has called us to be in is not a waste. It is impactful. It will help us. It will strengthen our relationship with Christ. It will strengthen our faith in him, and it will help us to remain faithful in God. So be faithful in whatever season God has called you into, and stop focusing on your future. Stop focusing on the next step, because you're not getting to the next step until you are faithful in the first step, in the first thing that God has called you to do. So that is the end of this video. Please have an amazing day, and I'll see you within the next, I think, part of this Bible series. I think there's going to be more parts. We'll see where the Lord is taking me. And yeah, have an amazing day, and please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.